Hey, Doug. Hey, Aaron. It's so nice to have you guys on the Everything Saxophone podcast.
Thanks for
It's
having
great
us.
to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Cool. So, this is going to be a really exciting episode for all the listeners, and especially for me. I ran into Doug at NAMM this year, 2020, before quarantine hit, and we talked for a little bit, and, we thought, what a great idea to have you guys come on Horn Effects, right? To come on and talk about your company, talk about what you do, talk about, the no pun intended, the effects of effects pedals on wind instrumentalists. So let me start off this way. If you guys, let me start off with Aaron, actually, trumpet player. And this is great for me, folks, because I play trumpet and saxophones. But Aaron, talk a little bit about your background and how you met Doug.
Sure. I'm from Massachusetts. I grew up there. Was really blessed to be in a great music program all through elementary, junior high school, had great teachers, great friends that kind of kept me in it and got me really wanting to do music at a higher level. And so when I was looking at colleges, I came upon Oberlin, mostly because of the double degree program. I was a pre-med biology major, and actually Doug was not a music major either. He'll get into that, at least for a time. So that's kind of what made me want to go there, and just the high quality of music that was there. And about that time is when I met Doug. We were the same year, and college kind of we had a great relationship through college, but it was not so much a musical one. Like Doug had a great band, like a funk band that played parties, and we did that all the time. But we just honestly like worked out together a lot and just were great friends. And then after college, I moved to Boston for a year. I worked at Brigham and Women's Hospital. I hung out with some of the Berkeley kids and decided that I should do trumpet professionally. At that point, I moved to Detroit. I lived in Detroit for about 4 years, playing mostly gospel, R&B, hip hop, that whole world. And it was about that time, I would say, when Doug and I were talking. This was about 2016, middle of 2016. And that's kind of about the time that the idea for Horn FX came about. So I'll pass it to Doug now for his background, and then we can get to there.
Cool.
Yeah, so I grew up both in Wyoming and New Jersey. I split the year and played saxophone since I was 10. Had a lot of great teachers, had a lot of really awesome music experiences early. I got to play with some very heavy people when I was very young because of some family connections and because of luck, as it usually goes. And then, when I was going to school for the same things that Aaron went to Oberlin for, I did too. I was pre-med for quite some time at Oberlin. And initially thought I was going to be a music major, do all the pre-med stuff. Got there, was like, no, I'm just going to do the pre-med stuff, do the music when I can. And then said, no, I'm not going to be a doctor. So I went back to being a music major. And then after that, I left college and I worked on cruise ships playing for a year. Paid vacations are always nice. And then started working day jobs, just being a normal adult that, worked a corporate job and played on the weekends, played at nights, and got to the point where I was pretty much doing music full-time and I was doing my job full-time. And about 2016 really started constantly talking with Aaron almost every day at a certain point about pedals and stuff. And we eventually got to the point where like, we gotta do something about this. And we started to craft the idea of Horn Effects.
Yeah, so it was something that we had both been always interested in, and I think Doug has a bit of a background with guitar and bass, and then also has always been kind of very into like the classic rock scene, and so he had a lot of experience with the pedals and just understanding of them. Whereas for me, I had much less so. I had gotten a Yamaha silent brass system when I graduated high school, and it took me almost 3 years of college to even feel comfortable enough to use it on a performance. And same thing there. I mean, you're plugging the bell with a mute, and the sounds are incredibly digital and terrible. And so that kind of deterred me from doing it so much. But then once we became, we went out into the world and I started playing professional gigs and playing in small horn sections and being on stage at stadiums or something like that, I was like, man, wouldn't it be nice to just, I think a lot of one of our fundamental Horn FX founding questions was, at least from my perspective, I have a saxophone player in my section. I want to be able to have an octave down and sound like a trombone so that there are 3 of us, so that all of my higher notes are supported. And it was almost as simple as that. When Doug and I really started kind of talking about, man, like there is so much information for guitar players online. You can go and find 25, 30 different YouTube channels devoted to reviewing these pedals from the perspective of a guitar or from the perspective of a bass. And there was absolutely nothing for us. Some of the most highly viewed YouTube videos at that time on the horns and pedals subject were kind of relatively informative and not based too much in research, more just like, hey, I bought this and this is what it sounds like. And we were like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we could find a way to get our hands on enough pedals of different types to be able to create just some sort of database where these pedals are reviewed broadly from the perspective of horn players and wind instrumentalists in general.
All right, so question, hold on a second. So when you were looking at these other YouTube videos, and I know a lot of people like to do like, product reviews and stuff like that. Around the time of 2015, 2016, were there many saxophone effects pedals out there at the time?
So the vast majority, if not all of the technology we use is still guitar pedals. The effects and electronics that we talk about on our website, in our books, and in kind of the daily Horn FX life is still meant for guitar. And that's really the genesis of the problem, is that all of the effects that are out there that are available in this stomp box form, they are not talked about from the saxophone, trumpet, trombone, whatever perspective, because that's not who they're intended for. And that's really what we are trying to combat, is that lack of information from our perspective, because that's such a key difference in the approach, in the way that you think about pedals and the way that you use pedals, and then also in like the basic technical things of how do you actually connect to pedals and things like that.
All right, now I have another question though. You had, Aaron, you use an analogy of the saxophone player wanting depth, so getting an octave below, right? But what about, as a trumpet player, we know this, what about having someone playing an octave higher? As a trumpet player, you'd want the depth of an octave lower too, because then you really, when you have that fat bottom sound, like the top sings, but I'm sure people would also want that octave higher effect as well.
Sure, that's a great question. I think that is part of what Doug and I set out to learn when we were going through this. And I guess in our research, reproducing tones below your tone usually sound better than reproducing tones above your tone. So although octave up pedals absolutely exist, and I'm not going to say I don't use them, I definitely do use them from time to time, they don't come across with the same power and just sonic qualities as the natural trumpet does up there. So I mean, we talk about this all the time when we give lessons or when we, in writing our chapters about this, but harmonies and octaves are oftentimes best reproduced an octave below, or just below your natural sound. And I mean, that's been pretty consistent. Doug, you can hop in if I'm wrong, but that's been pretty consistent across every octave or harmony or pitch shifting pedal that we've come across, especially for trumpets and that particular idea.
Yeah, in the main, these harmony pedals that we're using, except for a very select few, are digital. And when you digitally recreate a sound higher up, it doesn't have the same complex harmonic structure as a note that you would naturally play that high up, especially on a trumpet. And so the sound tends to get thinner, more tinny, and a little bit more robotic, I would say.
Okay, then let me play devil's advocate for just 1 second. All right, so you've got these pedals. I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but you've got all these effects pedals, all that type of thing. Let's say you're in a horn section, right? You're in a cool, funky band. You all have the effects pedals. Couldn't people argue that, oh, wow, these guys are using pedals, they're taking jobs away from, hiring another trombone player, or, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and that is initially a very fair thing to think. But one of the core fundamental principles of what we do is trying to enable people to continue to work and to continue to compete in the musical world. When things get back to normal and people get back to playing on stage, what you're going to notice, if you think about it, is that horn players are the only people on stage without electronics. Why is that? That's one of the things that makes us so marginalized. As horn players in the professional world, it's so easy for us to be the last people hired, or to be replaced, a whole horn section replaced by a keyboard player. There's so many opportunities for horn players to be cast aside because we don't bring too much that's unique and modern to the table. But if you show up to a gig, even within a horn section, and you have a pedal board, probably not as big as this one because that's not very practical, but if you show up with a pedal board and you can do all of these things that make you a saxophone or a trumpet or a trombone, make you a wind instrumentalist, but then also make you able to live in the modern, more electronic musical environments that are created around you, and then you're going to be a lot harder to cast away, and it's going to make you a lot more well suited for the contemporary world that we live in. And so, yes, you may be one person that takes the job of two other horn section players in that one instance, but overall, what you're doing is you're enabling horn players to be a competitive athlete in the sport of music in the modern world.
Yeah, and just to take this one step further, I think going back to our initial analogy of having a trumpet with an octave down to quote unquote replicate a trombone, this is like one of our favorite questions to answer, by the way. That is not to eliminate the need for a trombone. It's to free the trombone player to play the third harmony. If you think about it, if you have a three-piece horn section, the trumpet player is playing the top line, the saxophone player is playing the primary harmony. The trombone player, if you want a strong sound, has to play unison with the trumpet player. But if I'm already playing unison an octave below with myself, then the trombone player is able to play the third harmony in that chord. Now all of a sudden you have a 4-note chord instead, and I'm not necessarily even taking anything away from that trombone player. If anything, I'm making him or her think a little harder, and that's a good thing.
I mean, one of the cool things that you can do once you get familiar with effects and comfortable with them is that you can turn a 3-person horn section into a 4-person horn section, etc. But the kind of the ultimate reality is every now and then Aaron and I get to play together. I think we played a wedding a couple of years ago, and we both had pedal boards, and there's just two of us in a horn section, and at points it sounded like we had almost a big band. You can really do more things that can be, like Aaron said, supportive of the members of the horn section to make the whole entire musical reality better.
Right. So maybe I'm thinking about playing just roots and fifths, and Doug is thinking about just playing thirds and sevenths. And so he can set his pitch shifters to achieve that, and I can set mine to achieve the roots and fifths. And all of a sudden we've got, one turns into 4, he turns into 4, and we've got 8.
Wow, this is revolutionizing horn section playing, and potentially arranging. Yeah,
absolutely. We've talked about starting to develop pedal notation.
That's interesting.
Which is very challenging because since the pedal world is so vast and modular, you're almost never going to have a situation where someone has the same pedals as you are when you're writing.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's very interesting. And actually, you know what? Let's flip this a little bit. There's probably going to be a lot of people that are listening right now that have no experience using pedals, stomp board, this, that. They have no clue what you're talking about. So can we start from the very beginning and just pretend even for myself, I'm pretty much a newbie with this as well.
Yeah. So honestly, to be a little self-aggrandizing, the very first step would be to go to our website, because there are 3 main groups of people that we've created content for, and that is beginners with no experience, people who are intermediately experienced, and then even people who have been doing this for longer than we have, for 40, 50 years. We work with some real legends that still are learning. So the key with understanding where to start would be going to do our website, horn-fx.com, and we have a free getting started guide that you can download. And that kind of breaks down the challenges that you will face. It breaks down some of the initial things that have to be done. Probably the most challenging thing to figure out initially is getting from a microphone to the pedals because they are not meant to interface. It's meant to be just a line, an instrument plug from a guitar or a bass into the pedal with no issues, but microphones really complicate the issue. So that's the first challenge that you'll have to get over. And then we talk about more conceptual things like what to think about, what kind of effects are available, how you should conceptualize things before you go out there and start spending a lot of money.
Okay, cool. And I'm just thinking too, you know, Aaron, you spoke before about like you'd think about roots and fifths, and Doug would think about thirds and sevenths. And, you know, again, I don't know really anything about this, but, you know, how to use the pedals to, well, when to use the pedals, when not to use the pedals, because you're not going to use them all the time. You know, those are other things I would think you'd have to think about as well.
Sure. So let's take a step back and say another thing that Doug and I always say, which is that if you don't sound good on your instrument, these pedals are not going to help you sound better, right? You still need to practice every day. You still need to understand harmony and understand the ins and outs of your instrument, and perfect your craft before you can use these pedals to enhance it, right? And what these pedals are doing is just that. They're only enhancing the current ability of your craft. So when you're thinking about those things, be it harmony, be it changing your sound altogether into a synthesizer, be it using cavernous delays and reverbs for particular sounds, you got to come at it from that perspective of like, this is only to enhance my sound in this given context. So as the gig goes on, it's the way we see it is our pedal boards are an extension of our creativity, basically. So there is nothing, at least in the way that we use it, there's not very much that's pre-planned. It's meant to be a device that fosters creativity and fosters creative thinking in the midst of a gig instead of kind of not during it or preparing things for it. So when I say I'm thinking about roots and fifths and Doug's thinking about thirds and sevenths, that might just be for one song in a 4-hour set. And then the next one comes and I decide to use a phaser and Doug's using a wah-wah pedal. And so it's like it changes drastically from song to song, and it's really just an extension of creativity.
But you guys would have to be on the same page, I would think, in terms of if you're in a horn section, right? You know, like, hey, I'm going to use this effect, or am I wrong? You know, I'm going to use this effect. What are you going to use?
Yeah, there's a lot of communication in that specific scenario that has to happen. The communication doesn't have to be too complex, but there's a lot to take into account, because if I've got 10 pedals and he's got 10 pedals, that's 10 possible things on my end and 10 possible things on his end that could clash. And so a big important thing is just be like, I'm doing this. What are you doing? Great. That also relies on the ability for you guys to speak the same language, both musically and electronically, right? It relies on experience with each other. It relies on experience with your own gear, knowing your own gear and what it will and can do.
And also, I would think too, like types, genres of music. I mean, a lot of people love to play straight ahead jazz, but I can't foresee them using pedals, unless they want to really take, oh, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, tell me.
Well, actually, one of the greatest straight ahead jazz musicians on planet Earth, Sean Jones, uses a pedal board that we built for him.
Wow.
And he's always been one of the most terrifying trumpet players out there, but he's really doing a lot of interesting innovation, playing like last time I saw him was in the Jazz Standard, playing some fairly straight ahead stuff using a pedal board.
Wow.
Just because there's a lot of blinking lights and a lot of fancy metal boxes and things like that doesn't mean that you are free of the ability to be subtle with your effect. Subtlety is actually probably the most exciting way to use effect, in my opinion, because it really shows a thinking person and an educated musician where they're not just turning on an effect to sound different, they're more acting and thinking like a producer on the fly.
Oh, how interesting. That's cool, and I'm really glad that you clarified that for me, and I'm sure for a lot of the listeners. Now, let's take this, let's go a little bit more practical right now, because I know you have your setup there, Doug, and can we show off some of these, these effects?
Sure. Yeah.
Cool.
So let's talk about subtlety for a second.
Yes.
The very first reason that I brought a pedal to a gig was to deal with a sound man that I knew was going to be a problem. I was playing in a lot of bars in New Jersey, Jersey Shore type of gigs, those types of things. and the sound men did not know anything about horns, mixing horns, anything like that. So more often than not, I'd go to a gig and the reverb would be so much, and I would sound like I was playing smooth jazz while playing a Bruce Springsteen song. and then I was never loud enough. So I made sure that I had something to make myself louder, because I didn't trust the sound guy, and something to make sure that I was in control of my reverb, because I was tired of going to a gig and being like, hey, I sound terrible and I have no control. So that's really where it started, in a practical sense. And so to give yourself that level of practical control is another way to use the pedal. So let me show you what I mean by too much reverb, too little reverb, and the real difference.
Yeah, and while you're getting that set up too, you bring up an incredibly important point. Recently, I had shot a video about when you can't hear yourself on stage, and I actually had a situation. So I grew up on Long Island, and I know what you're talking about in terms of, not having control over your sound. There were some great sound people, and there were some others that just really didn't know enough. But out here, when I played the Viper Room, it was, Ultimate Jam Night, and so they wanted me to play Rod Stewart's "Do You Think I'm Sexy?" So I did that solo. I actually did it on tenor instead of alto, so I was like, yeah. And I couldn't hear myself. I could not hear the keyboard at all in my monitor. At first I did, and all of a sudden the guitar went on. I was like, oh my God, I'm deaf. Thank God I have earplugs in, because I would have totally lost my hearing. But I couldn't hear myself, and they couldn't hear me in the audience at all. And it was frustrating because, I really, I nailed that solo, and it was a great experience playing with those great musicians, but I've got nothing to show for it. So a lot of people would probably be saying, yeah, that's happening to me. And, would having effects pedals and stuff help with something like that?
Yeah, I would say before Doug goes into this, the primary reason I started using pedals, period, was to be able to guarantee that I was going to be able to hear myself. Because one of the kind of subtle advantages that using pedals gives you that you don't necessarily even think about very much when you're first getting involved, because you're more fixated on new sounds, right? But for us, it was like having volume control and being able to adjust your own volume on the fly in the monitor is game changing, completely game changing. And the whatever you do, let's say you really need to boost yourself by 10 dBs, the front of house sound man can turn you down if he wants. But if you can't hear yourself, that's it's a recipe for having a terrible gig. I mean, we, especially as trumpet players, we know that our sound is so directional and we're pointing it directly away from us.
Yes.
So we need some sort of way for that sound to ricochet back, and we need some sort of control. So I'm sure you've seen a lot of, LA guys or New York, New Jersey guys with the shields, the plastic shields to bounce the sound back. This is just another way of accomplishing that same problem, basically, or kind of solving that same problem. So it's been a huge game changer for both of us, being able to have this volume control on the gig. It's almost like a master override button. And I even have a volume pedal on mine, which is maybe slightly different than what Doug has, where if there's somebody, for one of my problems was I would be going onto these big stages and there'd be feedback happening, and everyone would look at me because I'm the trumpet player that has pedals. I'm the new one, but I have a master volume pedal. So if feedback happens on the stage and I turn my volume off, then it can't possibly be me. So then it's a great way to be like, nope, it's not me. Like, we got to find it somewhere else, because we know it's not my system that's giving the feedback. And most of the time, because sound engineers and artists are not familiar with wind instrumentalists using pedals, they immediately default to thinking that it might possibly be you. So it's been a huge game changer having just volume control.
Now,
there's
mentioned
a lot of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you mentioned also, and I'll be doing a review of this actually very soon. Like the sax, there's a sax deflector. It's actually not even a saxophone. It's the Jazz Lab deflector, right? And the sound shields and stuff. And what's great about that is that one little device can be for saxophone, trumpet, and trombone. So you're saying they wouldn't even, if you're using pedals, you wouldn't even need something like that, because you would, or you could use it if you wanted to, but
Right.
You wouldn't need it.
If you bring pedals to your gig, it essentially ensures that the sound man has to run you through the monitor. And once you're being run through the monitor and you have volume control over yourself, you don't really need that anymore. That's the key. Like if you're going to a gig and you're just a trumpet player and the mic is theirs, then they can set you up with whatever volume you have in that monitor, and it might not be enough. It probably won't be enough.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the difference here, is that it probably wouldn't be enough in our case either, but we have a master override switch. We have several. So we can, oh, sorry, that wasn't enough volume. There's 10 more dBs. You can deal with it in the front of the house, but I'm happy now. So
yeah, it in some ways, we've kind of learned how to very gently bully soundmen into doing what we want.
Absolutely.
And it makes life much better.
and
I mean,
sound.
but in that same way, right? What Aaron talked about is a very real reality that a lot of people deal with, myself especially, because I have this really unnecessarily large pedal board, is that you deal with a lot of skepticism and people throwing a certain amount of shade at you when you show up. If you go to a gig with pedals and the sound man hasn't dealt with that before, maybe has but doesn't know you, or the people in the band aren't aware, there's likely to be skepticism and doubt and people saying some things that might actually make you pretty upset. I deal with that constantly. And it's really interesting to try and figure out how to parse through that, because you'll either get the guys be like, oh, what do you need all that for? Or are you just going to feed back the whole time? Or you get people like, this is so awesome and this is so cool. So you get a little bit of both.
And probably not even just people on the gig. I mean, because it's new, whenever there's something new, people are they're confused about it, afraid about it. I mentioned before, maybe taking jobs away, all that kind of stuff. So let's talk about this for a second. Have you gotten flack from the community with regard to using pedals and stuff?
For me, I would say no. And I'm not exactly sure why. I think I've definitely lost gigs because I've used pedals poorly. That's for sure. And that's on me. And all of that happened, when Doug and I were just starting this business and we were not very well informed. So I know what that feels like, to bring kind of another element into your playing and have it not work in the way that you maybe anticipated it working. I kind of have to tell this story. I remember there was one gig I was playing. There were maybe 20,000 people there, and I was supposed to play this solo in F major. I thought it would be a smart idea to turn on my harmonizer pedal to F major so there'd be two of me playing. I played the whole solo, thought it sounded great, and then saw a YouTube video maybe a couple months later, and my pedal was in F minor.
Oh.
And I didn't know. So there are definitely absolutely hazards to this life, where if you go in, you do that, then it's probably not going to be very accepted. But it just like bringing your instrument onto a gig makes people assume that you know what you're doing. Bringing pedals onto the gig also makes people assume that you know what you're doing. And if you don't, then that's when you look bad. If you do, then, when Doug might get, subconsciously judged by others when he brings his giant pedal board onto the gig. But after the gig, I guarantee you there's no judgment. There's more like, whoa, that's awesome. And I've seen that countless times, even with myself, where I've been playing in a section with sax players or trombone players, and there's no judgment. They're just they're skeptical. They're kind of like, what is this? Why do you feel the need to bring all this? And then I'll share, but then I just play the gigs. And when after a 2-week tour, the sax player would be like, okay, I need to get a lesson from you on this. Like, I need to incorporate this into my playing now. So it's more like, people see it and they may be skeptical, but as soon as they hear it and they understand that it can be used with maturity and it's not going to be overused and it's not a way to shield or hide any of your musicality, I think they get over it pretty quick, and then they want it themselves.
Yeah, I mean, I think letting your playing do the talking is really the key to addressing that skepticism. That also, of course, relies on the fact that your effects use is mature and thoughtful and not overbearing. I mean, there've definitely been plenty of Jersey bars that I've played in where I show up with my pedal board. It's bigger than the guitar player's pedal board, and they are not very happy. And then I can remember this one time I was playing a gig, and there was we were playing a Guns N' Roses song. I forget which one, but there's a guitar solo in it, and the guitar player didn't know the solo, but luckily I did. And so I just threw on my distortion and my delay, and I out-guitared the guitar player and played the solo. The place went crazy. And afterwards, he spent 20 minutes talking to me about pedals, when at the beginning of the gig, he threw me lots of shade.
Wow, that's so cool. That's so cool. All right, I know. Sorry that I digressed for a second, but you guys brought up some really important points that I think people may have had questions about. So let's get back to Doug showing us, some of those pedals.
So back to the idea of just the subtlety of reverb and how it can be too much or too little. So I'll just play. This is just going through my board completely clean, no reverb at all. So when you're playing in a band, that's going to sound out of context. It's going to sound like you're sitting in a room with the sax player while you're in a club with the rest of the band. So if you want to fit in with the overall vibe of the rest of the band a little better, you throw out a little reverb like I just did, and then you get this. Can you hear how it adds just a little bit of context?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it really
definitely.
it just gives you a little bit of more life and a little bit more presence. But if you do this and you add too much reverb, then you're probably not going to sound appropriate for the context that you're playing in.
So you have to know that room when you think about it. You've got to, you know what I mean?
Less so the room, because really what the reverb is doing is that it's putting you in whatever room you choose.
Right.
It's more knowing the style of music you're playing. So if I'm playing in a funk band and I want to play like a tight funky solo, I don't want this to be the sound. Like that, it just sounds like I'm in this big cavernous hall and doesn't really fit contextually.
Right. And going very briefly back to what we were talking about with using pedals in a jazz context, reverb and delay are absolutely amazing examples of what you can do in a jazz context and a straight ahead context that's really going to enhance your playing. Playing a bossa or playing a ballad and just being able to have some nice subtle delays or reverbs on there, it can add a ton, and in a very subtle way.
Yeah, so here's a delay with a little bit of reverb, and you'll hear how it can put your ballad head playing in a little bit more of a appropriate kind of produced context to fit with the vibe of the song itself. So. You hear how there's the reverb is pretty quiet and the delay is pretty quiet, but it gives you just a little bit more body and a little bit more of an environment that you're playing in.
Yeah, and I'm thinking also too, you'd want to know how much delay, setting that, like you said before, you have to really, just like you have to know your horn, you have to really know, how to use these pedals, these effects.
So you asked before about what a beginner should think about and what they should know before getting into this. And I think one of the things that a lot of beginners make the mistake of doing is assuming that this is just a bunch of stuff that you plug in and turn on, and that's it. But I think a more effective and long-term good approach is to take a look at a pedal or a pedal board as a whole new instrument that you have to learn. It's a whole new environment that you have to understand how to play in, and a whole new set of techniques that you have to understand how to utilize. And so just being like, I'll just throw a bunch of stuff on a board and turn it on when I feel like it, that's probably not going to yield the type of situations where your playing will assuage any skepticism. So when you approach saxophone pedals or trumpet pedals or trombone pedals or anything like that, you have to look at it not only as an extension of your creativity, but also as a brand new instrument that you have to learn. So with the amount of delay I just had on there, that's a fairly appropriate amount of delay for that context if we're playing just in a jazz club. But if I do this and I bring the delay up way too loud, it's going to step all over myself, and you'll have a ballad that sounds like this. that's probably a little much.
Yeah.
Like you
Right.
have to,
So with that thought process of each pedal being its own instrument, that's a perfect example. We haven't even gone through more than 2 pedals on Doug's board, and he could already sound terrible if he didn't know what he was doing, you know? And so that's a lot of people. And I think one of the kind of just going back to Horn FX as a whole, one of the things that we do and one of the services that we provide is we alleviate that anxiety of people wanting to buy pedals and not knowing which ones to buy. And this is a great example. There's reverb and delay pedals come in all different complexities and styles. And for a beginner, it might be a smart idea to buy a pedal that's pretty simple so that there's not a lot that could go wrong, you know? And then as you become more and more comfortable with the terminology of a delay pedal, which the terminology of a delay pedal is different than the terminology of a reverb pedal, which is different than the terminology of a harmonizer pedal. As you become more understanding of those terminologies, then it might be a smarter idea to buy a more versatile delay. So the delay Doug's using right now it's one of the more complex delay pedals on the market. And to give that delay pedal to a beginner might be a recipe for disaster. Whereas if you give them something much more simple with a couple of knobs, it's still going to sound good. It's, you know, there's nothing that says that this more complex pedal sounds better. It just is more versatile. It has more capabilities. So.
And for the beginner to think, well, how many pedals am I going to end up buying? You know, if I got to get a simple one and then I got to upgrade to a complex one. This is just like you're playing musically. If you look at note choice and pedal choice from the same perspective, right? You can approach it with the same idea of subtlety or using space or not playing and not using effects. It's the same thing. As your playing progresses and you figure out how better to use notes, you gain more tools in your toolbox, whether it's lines or understanding of scales and arpeggios and things like that. It's the same thing with pedals, and it's kind of a never-ending exploration. This is my 4th board that I've built for myself. Aaron's on his 3rd. I'm about to build a new one for myself for a smaller, to have a smaller board. It's kind of a never-ending exploration, especially since new pedals keep coming out all the time.
Yes, and just to make this sound a little bit better, because that sounds like a lot of money being spent. These pedals are, first of all, they have incredible resale value because they're really strongly built. They last forever. People are still buying pedals made in the 70s and 80s now on Reverb. So kind of to put it in perspective, if you buy a $300 pedal, you're going to be able to sell that pedal on the market for like $240, $250. So it's not the worst thing in the world to buy a pedal and make a mistake in buying it, or buy a pedal and have a new pedal come out that you might want more than that pedal. It's not like one of these hobbies where you buy all of these things and then they just sit in your drawer in your closet forever. They have value to a lot of people, and they can be kind of sold on the market very easily.
Yeah,
So I was going to say, a lot of the stuff that we do and have bought, we've sold a lot of the pedals that we don't need anymore, or we've kept them for educational purposes, or things like that.
Yeah, and you'll find yourself in scenarios where you buy the complex pedal and you're like, I should go back to the simpler one. And so then you end up saving money long term. And also, these are work tools. It's not like Aaron said, these aren't going to sit in your drawer. You're buying these for a purpose, and you're theoretically, if you're a professional, you're making money with them, and also you can write them off. And so this is all a part of that complex of stuff that you can put into the way that you think about living your musical life. You got to buy reeds, you got to buy valve oil, you got to maintain your horn well to continue to get yourself more gigs, to continue to compete in the marketplace of music. You can buy these other tools and become an expert with them and really expand your ability to earn as a musician.
And actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, you also said too before that, you look at each pedal as its own instrument. Well, also think about it this way too. And, I know trumpet players may not be as crazy about mouthpieces and stuff. I know saxophone players tend to be. How many times have you tried out a new mouthpiece, right? You're looking for, certain ease, a certain efficiency. It's the same thing. It's another type of instrument that you would invest in. And, maybe sometimes you use a certain mouthpiece for certain situations. I tend to like to use one mouthpiece for everything, but people are different that way too. So it's just another way to look at it. And, you buy an instrument, 10 years later, you may want to buy, may want to buy a different instrument, a different model, a different brand.
Yeah,
Same
and
with
kind of what this speaks to also, as far as the Horn Effects website is concerned, is, as we were talking about how we can cater to beginners and intermediates and professionals, this is exactly an important thing for beginners to be thinking about here. And it's a reason why we group our pedals by complexity when we're reviewing them, because there are certain, for a beginner, it doesn't make sense to buy a high complexity pedal when they're not exactly sure what the terminology is yet. So it's just another kind of subtle way that we attempted to cater to users of all levels and kind of alleviate that anxiety right there. Like, why do I need a super complex, super expensive pedal when there's this, both of us actually have pedals on our board, phaser pedals, that have literally one knob. They're the smallest, easiest, most non-complex pedals that you could imagine, but they sound great, so we use them. There's nothing wrong with a lack of complexity, that's for sure. But for just when it comes to beginner, intermediate, advanced, it is smart to, if you're a beginner, stay on the least complex end of things.
Absolutely. And I would think there's also a certain type of technique. Like a lot of the pedals you use but with your foot, right? And you're talking about like a knob and that kind of thing. So I would think as you're practicing your instrument, you have to get confident enough and, to be able to make sure you're hitting the knob at the right point,
Yes.
Yes, and that can lead you into the more complex world. Once you start needing that precision, then you can start looking into pedals that contain presets or the ability to save presets, because then you just hit a preset and you know that you're set up. Then you can continue to get more and more advanced. The most expensive and largest pedal on my board doesn't make any sound. It is purely a control mechanism for all of the other pedals. It sends MIDI messages. It allows me to turn pedals on and off. I can turn off every pedal on my board except for one with just the touch of one button. And that's kind of like the ultimate level of complexity when it comes to pedal control. And once you get to a point where you've crafted an identity, a sonic palette of things that you use and ways that you kind of influence your playing with your pedals, then you might want to get to the point where you have the ultimate level of control, so you never have to bend down and everything is situated so that you can have complete control with your foot with the fewest presses of a button possible.
Wow.
And just to put that into the perspective of guitar world and major performance world, most of the great rock bands or classic bands like that, where there are a lot of guitar players that front and they have massive pedal boards, they have this same level of MIDI control where, let's say their set is 20 songs, and then each song they just go from one preset to the next and they press one button, but that button affects 20 pedals that are all on a rack behind the stage, and it changes them to the one distortion sound that they need to take this one solo on this one song. Then when they're done, they just press the next pedal or the next button over to the right on their controller, and it moves to, that's that classic 12-string acoustic guitar sound that they need for the beginning of the next song. So a lot of professional guitarists will organize their entire set using this level of control, and that's it's a complex level of control for sure. Yeah. It's not something that a beginner should be messing with, honestly.
Yeah, it's definitely a more advanced approach. I can actually show you what it feels like, because there's some sounds. I have about 13 pedals on my pedal board, and there's some sounds that are comprised of 5 or 6 pedals, sometimes all the way up to 13. But then in the next section of the song, I want just my clean sound. And so to go from all of those pedals being on to none of those pedals being on, you can't just tap dance around on your pedal board and make a seamless change like that. So that level of control can become necessary depending on the complexity of the sounds you're creating. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
So I'll play like a really kind of unique harmonized sound, and then right away I can go right back to the clean sound. So here you go.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Doug, before we go on, hey, Aaron, thanks so much for being here. and thanks for your input. And we will see you in part 2 because we're going to do a part 2 of this.
Awesome. I appreciate your time. I can't wait to watch the rest and hear all the crazy sounds Doug's going to make here.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thanks
Bye,
for having me.
Aaron.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye.
Cool. So, wow, that was really cool. That was a really cool sound effect. And it's funny. It just something that came to mind too for women. With the guys, I think it's because of the shoes that you can wear. Okay, for the women, it's a little harder, especially women that are wearing heels and that kind of thing. I know that may not be something that you think about, but a lot of the women that I know that perform, they get really dressed up and they're wearing heels and that kind of thing. How easy is it to operate these pedal boards?
Well, actually, I'm going to do a plug for a buddy of mine now that you say that.
Okay.
As you can see on here, I have some of these gold buttons, right? These are called Barefoot Buttons. Most pedals, in fact, let me grab one. Most pedals have a foot switch that is about a 1/4 inch in diameter. Looks just like that, right?
Okay.
That's what the foot switch looks like. And if you're thinking about playing barefoot, or if you're in heels where you have a relatively narrow space of foot to press with, this can be a bit of a challenge. It's thinner than the tip of my finger. So there's this amazing musician that everyone should check out called Mike Love. He's a pedal master and a looping genius, major inspiration for all of us at Horn Effects. And he worked with this guy Brett in Hawaii to create these things called Barefoot Buttons, which is a very simple piece of technology. It is just this little, we have our logo etched in. It's pretty cool. It's just a little domed circular piece of metal that you put on top of the pedal's button, and it gives you much more surface area to hit. I miss buttons all the time. Once I put these on, I didn't miss them any time. And so that's a really good example of like stuff that you wouldn't find unless you were looking around on guitar sites all over the place and doing research that wasn't really helping you, but you happen upon something that can translate. So this little Barefoot button right here can be a great resource for really anybody. But if you're a woman playing and you're wearing heels, or if you're a man playing and you're wearing heels, this can really help with the actual pressing of the button, the physical mechanics of that.
Cool. I'm glad I mentioned that.
And we sell those on our site with in the store. It has our logo etched into it, multiple colors. It's really fun, easy to put on your pedals. And if you want a plain one, you should definitely go to barefootbuttons.com. Check them out. They're really wonderful people.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So now let's get back to your demonstration.
Sure.
Can you show some more pedals there?
Yeah. So what's one of the most, like if you were to be a wind instrumentalist, what we found is that your initial idea with pedals is harmony. Most people think that way because, I mean, think about the context that you and I grew up in playing, right? We play, in horn sections. The thing that we know is there's us and then there's more of us. So we want to do that by ourselves. And so that's probably the most common thing that horn players conceptualize first. So I can show you a little bit of the harmony. I'll just illustrate the difference between an octaver and a pitch shifter and a harmonizer. Those are 3 separate things. So an octave pedal is only going to allow you to do 2 things. Either add a note that is an octave away, or multiple notes that are an octave away, or transpose your note. So the first thing is, here is an octave pedal being used to create a sound that's me, and then me an octave down. Right, so that's what an octave pedal does. The next step up in complexity is a pitch shifter. That isn't going to change based on diatonic harmony, but will just give you an extra note or transpose your note by a fixed interval. A fifth, a fourth, a seventh, something like that. So here's me plus a fifth down. So if I'm playing a G, it'll play a C below me. but using the same pedal, I can also transpose. So I'm transposing down to that note now. So that's kind of the next level up. Now, every pitch shifter that you'll find that does the intervallic type of harmony where it's all fixed intervals, that's going to also be able to do the same stuff that an octave pedal can do. The next step up, a harmonizer will change or add sounds diatonically. And those pedals, more often than not, can do the same thing a pitch shifter can do and that an octave pedal can do. So the most complex, the harmonizer, can do the same thing as the other ones that are less complex. So here is just some basic harmony. This is diatonically, I'm probably going to play in concert C major, diatonically a third up and a fourth down to create a second inversion major chord. But as you'll see, as I go up the scale, it will harmonize based on that scale. So we're staying diatonic. So that's kind of what the harmony thing does. And of course, you can get to a point where you're being expansive with the ways you're approaching it. So if, with my harmony pedal, I have this preset where I have fixed interval harmonies that are not triadic. I think this one is a second up and a fifth down. And in the same preset, I have the ability to change the voicing to this.
Wow.
So you get a whole lot of different stuff going on.
Yeah, and I'm thinking with that also, how do I want to phrase this? So you really, again, this is another instrument. You really have to understand the capabilities of these pedals and, you know, how to preset them. And also I'm just thinking too, you know, like one song to another, you know, obviously you're going to have different presets.
Correct.
That could be challenging. I'm just thinking if,
certainly not. And that's when you do it the way that I'm doing it, which is the most complex way to do it, right? If you are someone who is just starting out, you may just have an octave pedal and an auto wah pedal, and that's it, and that's plenty, because there's such a huge difference between doing. There's such a huge difference if you are playing. Let's see, what's a good song? Oh, so if you're in a horn section. And you're playing Superstition, right? There's such a big difference between this and this. And since that's an octave down, you're always going to be able to use that and have it be, in terms of music theory, correct, right? Because you're playing the same note. And so that's something where you don't have to think nearly as hard as I'm thinking to actually do something with effects, right? You can put that on whenever you feel it's appropriate, and you're never going to be wrong. The only wrong would be maybe it's not the right context to add that octave down.
Thank you for clarifying that. That's exactly what I was thinking in my head, because, you know, a lot of people will use, you know, I'm seeing a lot of people like in cover bands who can absolutely, you know, probably salivating over this right now, you know, and thinking, okay, I've got to get me some pedals and I've got to get on that hornfx.com website right now because, you know,
and
just
buy all of our books and our T-shirts and everything.
Absolutely. And first download that freebie so that you have some basis or whatever.
Of course.
But, you know, I could also see, you know, some of my friends that play, you know, that play hip hop, that play, more contemporary jazz. I don't mean even smooth jazz. I mean more like contemporary jazz, and are looking to push the music to new levels. Like I think of Derek Brown, right? And
Mm-hmm.
the stuff that he's done, and he's starting to use some, aside from him creating his own special effects on the saxophone when he's playing,
Right.
but I think, if I'm not mistaken, that he's starting to use some kind of like effects pedals.
He's using, I believe he's using some looper stuff and then some delay stuff. Delay is so powerful. I mean, you're talking about cover bands, right? And one of the things that I've built my board to be able to do is be extremely versatile. I played in a lot of cover bands when I was living in New Jersey, and so I wanted to be able to recreate the sound from the record. That's a big thing. So one of the things that you can do, right, is you can, for example, one of the songs that both you and I have played a million times because we're in Long Island, New Jersey, is Baker Street, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that you can do, if you want to sound like Baker Street and you're playing that song, it's one thing to just go like this, right? And then it's a whole nother thing to do what they did on the album, which is put a bunch of delay on and then probably even a little chorus because it was the 80s. Was it the 80s or was it the 70s?
That was like late 70s and
It
stuff.
was like
mid to late
79,
70s.
something like that.
Yeah.
The pre-80s.
I love the 80s.
So then you can do this. See, now you're sounding like you're on the album if your presets work. And so that is a huge advantage when you want to really play the music well, because you sound like you're playing the music. You sound like you're playing the record. And that's a major advantage. So, but then that can translate, right? So now I have this 80s preset. Anytime I play an 80s song, I have the 80s saxophone sound.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting too, and I've talked about this just from my own site.
Right.
There's a difference, and again, Jersey, New York, right? We speak the same language. So, with a lot of the bands that we've been in, band leaders have wanted us to play the solo as recorded, right?
Exactly.
So, because,
especially Bruce songs, right?
oh God, yeah, absolutely, or anything that was iconic. I never had the chance to, but I would have loved to have played more Supertramp.
Yeah.
Oh God, I love those solos.
It's funny. I'm very close with the guy. He lives in New Jersey, who's their sax player right now.
Oh, who is that?
Michael Geegan. He is really great.
Oh, cool. Yeah,
he's great.
That's awesome. And the thing is that there was a thing that you had to play the solos that were recorded, and that was the feeling was that it's more authentic that way. But then again, not every band wants that, but
right.
And I haven't heard Michael Geegan play, but if he's doing the originally recorded solos, he would benefit from these types of effects pedals. I would
Exactly, and he does use effects live. I mean, it's this specific type of sound where you have the delay and you have a little bit of a chorus or a detuned doubling effect, and it really sells the song.
Absolutely. Now, can you get into some more effects pedals? There was something that you mentioned before. I forgot which pedal it was, but you had the harmonizer, you had the octave, all right, you had the delay, and there was something else. I forgot which pedal.
Well, there's a pitch shifter, which messes around with intervals, not necessarily diatonic ones, but fixed intervals. And so that's this sound I was using. So you were talking about, more straight ahead stuff or more modern jazz, right? This sound, when you have fixed intervals, but that are either close or fourths, that can really help translate to a cool modern sound. So you can play kind of like out, just kind of like out modern chordal type of stuff. And having that kind of dispersed collection of notes being played in that cohesive way, you can really create a cool modern sound. And that is perfectly appropriate for a jazz gig, what I just played, if you're playing that kind of modern jazz. And that's a pedal use that you probably wouldn't think of when you're thinking, all right, I'm going to play Nardis. there's a lot of contexts that are jazz or straight ahead or anything like that that can really be aided by pedals.
Absolutely. This has been so informative. And, one of the questions that I've had, and I've been waiting to ask this. So, yeah, you've got that's a large pedal board there. And I'm just thinking, okay, so you're a touring musician. We know how hard it is just to get your saxophone on the plane. I can't imagine.
So this leads me to a few things that I think we should talk about horn effects specifically. Because these are the types of thought processes that we did not find when we were doing research for effects for horns. So one of the basic things that we do is we educate. We've been talking about these books that we're writing a lot. We are in the middle right now of writing a full horn effects encyclopedia. Currently, we're finishing up our first modulation chapter that's going to cover wah pedals and envelope filter. Some people know them as auto wah, which is the famous sound that Brecker used on the Heavy Metal Bebop record, and that Jeff Coffin uses pretty frequently using his Q-tron pedal. That song Scratch and Sniff from Bella Fleck and the Flecktones.
Okay, yeah.
Like that kind of stuff. So that's what this next chapter is coming out. And actually, this encyclopedia is going to be a textbook for our higher education curriculum. We believe that this stuff should be taught in colleges, and we're actually talking to Berkeley about that right now. And so not only in this book are we talking about pedals and the way they sound and how to use them and the various types, but we're also talking about things that are more practical and technical. So we have a whole chapter completely devoted to the idea of connecting from a microphone to your pedals. We are also currently writing a chapter called Everything But the Pedals, which addresses the traveling situation, where we talk about cables. We talk about how to conceptualize using this in a live context in ways that don't necessarily have to do with sound, but practicality. How big should a board be? How can you know what you're doing so that when you do fly with it, you can carry it on and not spend $50 to check your extra bag? And so all of these types of things, not only the practicalities of the technology itself, but all of the logistics and the practicalities of being a working touring musician or a novice sitting in your basement, all of those realities surrounding those environments are going to be discussed as well, so that you get a whole context for pedal use, not just like, hey, this makes this sound. We also take that approach when we do consultations and lessons. So this is something we do as well, where let's say Donna needs some help. She's about to start her pedal journey. She can give us a call, and just like you'd get a lesson from any given sax player, we give lessons on pedals. We'll do Zoom calls and walk you through, do consultations to kind of help you not necessarily learn about pedals, but maybe figure out what kinds of pedals you want. Right? It's easy to know what you want to sound like, but then how do you put that into practice? Then we also do things where we build custom pedal boards. I built this pedal board. I build all these pedal boards for lots of folks. We've built pedal boards for Rashawn Ross and Dave Matthews Band, Sean Jones, Eric Bloom from Lettuce. Built one for Chris Royal, an exceptional sax player in New Orleans. He's an amazing multi-instrumentalist and sax player and a producer, songwriter, everything. He's amazing. He plays with Revolution a lot. And so we build pedal boards for people, and in that same vein that you're asking about with the flights, that's a big part of what we do. One of the reasons I'm about to build myself a new pedal board is because this is completely impractical to travel with. I just moved down to Dallas, and when things open up again, I'm going to be kind of introducing myself to a musical community down here. If I show up with this gigantic pedal board, no one's going to take me seriously, or no one's going to want to deal with this. This is way too big. But if I have something small that I can show up with, plop down on the floor, have it be mostly discreet, or at least not in the way, then I can actually show what I can do in a way that's a lot more palatable for the people around me. So a lot of these things have to be taken into consideration, and every level of the services that we provide for our colleagues and for our friends, whether it's building pedal boards, writing these books for the masses, giving lessons, giving consultations, or speaking at schools, those are things that we constantly talk about, because this is a perfect example of that. This can do everything. My pedal board can do everything except be used on the road. And so it's functionless when it comes to being a touring musician. That's
where I was getting at, and that's what I was really curious about. Unless It's funny because we're both from the East Coast, right? Now we're kind of, you're more central, I'm on the West Coast, but everybody drives everywhere here, and
Right.
people have no problem driving like 100 miles to a gig.
Right.
So, you know, we could conceivably carry these types of pedal boards. But my first thought was like, oh my God, trying to get that on a plane?
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't. And that's not what it's for. This is like the Horn FX mothership teaching board, right? This is also my personal pedal board, but this is meant to be the board that has everything, that can do everything, that can show you everything. And that does not lend itself very well to travel. Now, the board I'm about to build will be able to do virtually all the same things, but with a slightly lesser capacity. But this board will be, you know, travel size.
And here's another question for you, too. So when you build this board, are you also thinking about building a case for it?
We have a lot of contacts in the industry that make custom cases.
Okay, yeah, because I'm just thinking, too, you know, travel, it has to be really durable. And
yeah, I have a custom flight case for this board. I have a guy in Canada who's going to be making me a custom flight case for the next one with, I think, blue snakeskin on the outside, which is going to be cool.
Oh, wow.
And because it's all about aesthetics. If you didn't notice, my pedal board has lights underneath it that change color. So.
Oh, no. Okay. Wait. Trying to get this away from, get the video away from me.
What's your favorite color?
Purple.
How's that work for you? Oh, there it is. That's pretty purple. That's a little more blue. You can go red. You can do whatever you want. Yeah. It's not about how you sound. It's about how you look.
Oh, God.
Very silly.
Yeah, but you know what, though? How you look on the stage, it's a visual thing. You know, how you present yourself on stage, it puts it out there for your audience, too. And if they start... Now, not only do you have sound effects, you've got lighting effects there, too.
Oh, yeah. Big time.
Oh, God. That looks
really
so
silly.
awesome. Oh,
Thank
my
you.
God. No, it's great. I love that purple. That's awesome. Now, let me ask you also, too, like, you know, we're talking about you're building a smaller pedal board for traveling and whatnot. How durable are these pedals? You know, like, it's not as fragile as a saxophone, but...
Oh,
like,
no. Like Aaron said, there's still pedals that are being sold that were made in the 70s. They're by definition, they're pretty durable because they're all encased in metal. This is the Pog, the Nano Pog built by Electro Harmonix. Electro Harmonix is one of the biggest pedal companies there is, not like Boss, but they're up there. And this is the very first pedal I ever bought. And it's encased in this very durable metal thing. If I drop this right now, I'm not going to do it intentionally, but if I did, I wouldn't even worry about it. This stuff is extremely durable. There are parts of a pedal board that are not. Cables are not very durable. So when I build a pedal board, and the way I conceptualize them is that everything is fixed to the board as hard as possible. So
Okay.
like I could take this pedal right here.
I see. Yes, it
and
picks
lift
up the
my
whole board.
Yeah, so everything is pretty immovable, and that contributes to a longer lasting pedal board situation. The pedal board weighs about 45 pounds, so that's a pretty significant amount of strength that it's fixed with. But that means that the cables aren't going to move, the pedals aren't going to move. When things get jostled about, you're actually not going to break anything.
All right, then my next question also is this then, with the cables, like I know for me, so I use the AMT Quantum Mini 7, right? Which I love that microphone, and I'm just going to tease this to the audience, but we're going to be having, you know, Doug and Aaron on for part 2, because we're going to be talking about the intra mic, which I know a lot of people are so curious about. But anyway, getting back to this, so I used the AMT wireless, and with this, so I have to use the 1/4-inch plug. I was not happy when I saw that because I would prefer an XLR plug. To me, like those XLR cables tended to be more durable, and I've always seen guitar players every single time always have problems with their cables. So are you saying one of the things that, you know, may have to change out more frequently would be the cables?
Depending on how you treat your board and how your board is situated. So I've never changed a cable on my board, and I've had this for 3 years, and I've played about 100 gigs a year with it. So not changing anything out because of the way the board is situated. Nothing moves. If you're constantly unplugging and replugging and taking pedals off your board and doing all that, you're going to have to change pedals. It's just going to happen. And in fact, it's funny you bring up the AMT, because that was the microphone I used for a long time until I got the Intra mic. And I still use that same wireless setup. I have the mini receiver on my board, and that's what I put on people's boards whenever I build one, for the most part, if they want to do wireless. And I love that it has a 1/4" out, because you don't have to worry about the question of how do I get from my microphone to my pedals. You just go right from your wireless receiver right into the pedal.
That is true. Yeah, that is true. That is what definitely one advantage. I just know for me right now, because I just use wireless, a lot of times they'll have to use a DI box,
Yep.
you know, when I'm hooking them. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I don't bring my pedal board to my gigs, I have the full-size AMT receiver also, but I just started bringing the mini in my same box as my microphone with a DI, and it was very easy.
Cool. All right. So now we've addressed, you know, like beginners, intermediates to some effect. For the pros out there, what can your website offer them?
So I think one of the main things, I mean, all of our books that we have that are available on the website, currently there are 3, about to be 4. In fact, we did talk so much about harmony that it would be worth mentioning that one of the books that's on there is about harmonizers, pitch shifters, and octavers. There's 30 pages on that stuff, from anything from the specifics of individual pedals to the general realities of those pedals to how to use them in certain contexts. Our books are actually interactive, and they have over 200 audio clips for each of them. And so you can actually hear the examples we're talking about and hear these pedals being used in context with trumpet and trombone and saxophone. So you have a ton of audio resources with these books. So even an expert pedal user can gain something, because they can hear a pedal being used that they don't have, and they can hear how that pedal sounds. The reviews are extremely helpful for all levels as well, because just because you're an expert doesn't mean you know what to think about pedal X, right? So we have about 200 to 250 pedals reviewed on the site. And if you go, they are reviewed from the horn player perspective. So if you go and you look at the Eventide pitch factor review, right? That's the harmonizer I have on my board, the Eventide pitch factor. Oh, Eventide. That we talk about how it sounds with a trumpet. We talk about how it can and cannot be used for certain techniques. And so those are the types of things that experts can really glean from the website. But once you get more to that expert level, then the real help that we can provide is in consultations and lessons. We work with some pretty heavy duty guys who have been using effects for a long time, but they are by no means experts on effects. These guys are great musicians, right? These guys are guys like Julio Shaw and Sean Jones, guys like that. They are masters of their craft, but their craft isn't pedals. Their craft is their instrument and the music that they play. The pedals at this point are just kind of an annex in that world. And so when they talk to us, we help really refine their craft, because they know exactly what they want to sound like, or at least they know how they want to explore what they want to sound like. And so we can point them in the right direction, provide them resources, and build them pedal boards.
You know, this has been fantastic. I just have a couple more questions, and I want to again thank you for your time, because we've been on for quite a while here. In terms of, okay, I play trumpet, I play saxophone, right? Okay, 2 questions actually. The first one would be: do trumpet players, brass players, have other types of considerations compared to saxophone players? And then the next question would be: let's say I have that kind of crazy double, and I'm not the only person that does that, trumpet and sax. Would I need to have separate types of pedals, or are the pedals that you're talking about, it's for horn players?
Right. So a little bit of both is the answer to that. In certain scenarios, trumpet and saxophone will sound completely different on a pedal, or at least they will react a little bit differently. So on a phaser, for example, trumpet has a much more simplistic waveform than saxophone does. They're much more pure sound, and they actually react a little bit better with phasers when you have just the sound of the trumpet than a saxophone does. Not a ton, but a little bit. It speaks a little bit better, whereas a saxophone will speak a little bit less clearly with that effect. But you still can use them for both. The same thing applies to both, in that when you turn on a harmony or add a second, third, etc. voice, then the phaser really lights that up. And that translates across both instruments. What Aaron was talking about before regarding how notes above you being added can sound a little lower quality than the ones below. That differs slightly between brass and woodwinds. For example, I much prefer the sound of a major third up than a slightly lower interval to be added, because that on a tenor and on a baritone, even on alto, that translates really well. Going up to about a fifth or a sixth above your note will sound pretty good. Although when you're playing trumpet, the higher you play, then the higher notes will sound worse with the harmonizer or the octave pedal.
And that makes sense too, because you're even talking about the overtone series, harmonic series as well, right? Yeah. So, and this is where, again, this goes back to, you have to have a good amount of technique and control over your instrument, first, because when you use these effects, it's you amplified and you personified with all these different types of effects. But with a trumpet, when you're playing higher, it will get tinny if you do an octave higher than that.
It gets tinny on the trumpet.
Yeah.
There are very few trumpet players out there that when they hit a triple C, it sounds good. But what you said is absolutely the most important thing. The absolute most important foundation of your pedal use should be a good sound, should be being a good player. Because at that point, if you don't have that, then these are not going to help you, and you are not going to help them either. One of the key most important things is that we always want to have the DNA of our instrument in these effects, because like you were saying, before about taking jobs theoretically, or maybe some pushback from people. Well, if you always have the DNA of your sound in the affected sounds, then you're always going to be a saxophone player. Now, that isn't 100% of the time the case. I'll give you an example. I use a synth pedal called the Source Audio C4. And this is the greatest pedal I have ever used, because I can now sound like a synthesizer. So this is really the only scenario where you can't tell that I'm a saxophone for the most part. And so it sounds like this. So that's something that you can do. But for the most part, when I'm playing, even if I have a little bit of distortion on, you can still tell that it's a saxophone. And if I didn't have a strong foundation in my playing, then it would not really do me any good to have all these effects. The effects are not meant to change you. They are meant to be an enhancement to who you are in your musical and sonic life.
And actually, I was just thinking too, if you don't have a good control over your own intonation, wouldn't that affect the pitch shifters, the harmonizers, the octave?
Actually, that can be a double-edged sword. So yes, it can be really good if you have a lot of control over your intonation. So one of the things that I've been in horn sections and we've tried for hours to get right is doing bends and scoops together.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it by yourself, then it's perfect. But at the same time, if you are out of tune and you are using a harmonizer, then all of you are out of tune, right? If there's you plus two more of you because of the harmonizer, then you got three voices out of tune.
Yeah, that can definitely exacerbate something, because I'm just thinking, and this is true with any instrument. We always have certain notes, that will always be a little sharp, maybe flat.
But anybody who plays a Mark VI deals with that every day.
I know. It's like, especially fourth line D, but even fourth line D on any saxophone will always be a little bit sharp, in the fourth space E and stuff like that. But I was just thinking about all the types of things that, you have to be at a very, not a very advanced level of playing, but a really solid, level of playing, I would think, before you should, try to experiment with pedals.
Well, I would say before you try to use them on a gig. I think you should start experimenting with pedals the moment you pick up a saxophone, because at the end of the day, this is supposed to be fun. Like I'm not sitting here toiling over this bunch of hilarious looking blinking lights because I have to. I'm doing this because I love to do this, and it can be really exciting. And in fact, I think this, both Aaron and I think that this can be really the key to enhancing the quantity and the quality of musicians and musically educated people at an early age. Because if you are a young person now and you're in band, but Katy Perry is on the radio and The Weeknd is on the radio, you have nothing to connect with what you're playing. There's no context in which you matter or you apply. So then why would you play saxophone? If there's nothing that you're listening to or nothing that's around you that is saxophone involved, then what's the point? But if you put a single pedal into a kid's hands where now, oh my God, I can be electrified and I can do this crazy stuff, then you can have fun doing it and be more inspired to continue playing this instrument. I mean, one of the first things that I ever heard with effects that I think is the same for most of us was the Brecker Brothers, right? You have the heavy metal bebop record. So the moment I got my wah pedal, my auto wah, I was like, all right, I have to listen to the heavy metal bebop record and try and recreate this sound. Right? You want to sound like the things that you're hearing. So if you're a young person who's not listening to that kind of thing, not listening to Brecker or not listening to Eddie Harris or things like that, and you're listening to the radio, you want to try and be able to sound like that. So to give people at least the understanding, right, that a sound like this is possible. Then you have something to say to this young kid, right? And they're like, hey, play the saxophone because it's fun, you're cool, and you can do that.
A couple of points I wanted to make. I'm also thinking about, and you don't maybe know this yet, but I know going from Long Island, which is a very, very strong, most of the school districts there are very strong in music, hugely strong, and then coming out to here to California where it's almost an afterthought. I would think that this would be something that would be great to propose to, yes, of course, band directors, and but also, general music teachers too, in a sense. Yeah, I mean, of course, the kids would want to learn the instruments first, to be able to play them. But I would think that would be a great way to get more kids interested in taking up these band instruments. And you mentioned Katy Perry, The Weeknd, all these people that are on the radio, you barely hear a horn player. But this could be, like you said in the very beginning, the one way where horn players can be part of these, what's on the radio, what's current now.
Exactly. I mean, and also, I mean, you can use these in conjunction with normal practice. We like to practice scales, arpeggios, and patterns with a metronome, right? So, for a teacher who has the expertise and the tools to actually teach this stuff, let's say they want to get their student involved in pedals. One of the things that you can do, all right, you're practicing your arpeggios. So instead of using a metronome, use a delay pedal. And you can do something like this. So you can do something like this. Oh. You can use a delay pedal in a multitude of ways, but use it as a metronome for practicing arpeggios. You'll get to understand the quality of the chord that you're playing, right? There's a big difference between and you can actually hear the chord ringing out. And so that gives you better context, lets you have fun using a delay pedal, and helps your time all at the same time.
Yeah, and also subdivision. I call it hearing the smaller beats too, because you set that for 16th notes. And people always talk about having problems with timing. So something like this can certainly help their timing if they're, a lot of times we'll pull out tonal energy or something like that and be able to set the subdivisions. But this is a more musical way of doing it. And like you said, adding the context of being able to, we always say we can't play a chord on a horn. I mean, clearly trombone players have. That is true. But I mean, trombone players have the most luck, acoustically, of being able to do that compared to trumpets and saxophones or whatnot, where it's really clear. But just having the ability to have a chord come out of your instrument and to hear it and hear the quality of it will allow for someone to expand musically.
Yep.
Cool. All right. Well, listen, Doug, I wanted to thank you so much for your time. I think that, this has been so incredibly informative. And remind people of your website and any other social media channels that you have where people can contact you.
Yeah, absolutely. Please visit horn-fx, the two letters, F and X, horn-fx.com. We have an immense amount of free content on the website. We have a free getting started guide, hundreds of reviews. There's a forum on the website. We also have artist pages where we have our friends and collaborators, guys from Snarky Puppy, guys from Lettuce. We have Paul Hansen, the great bassoonist, all kinds of folks on there talking about their effects. They have their own pages where you can look at their gear and how they use it. Please also check out the store where we have the books that we're writing for sale. Currently, you can buy a book about harmonizers, you can buy a book about reverb and delay, and you can buy a book about getting from your microphone to your pedals. And we have more coming out soon. All of the social media is HornFX, no dash in between, just HORNFX. And of course, on the website, you can reach out to us, to me and to Aaron, to ask questions, schedule a lesson or a consultation. If you're an educator and you want some resources, we can figure out how to help you learn how to teach this stuff, to do it in an affordable way, because you can imagine teaching this can be a relatively expensive adventure as well. But there are affordable ways to do it. And we're always ready to be there for people to answer questions and to try and be of help.
Do you have, so I remember you mentioned that there's like a beginner starter's guide, right? Do you have like a weekly or a monthly newsletter?
Not really. We have fairly consistent social media posts. I do live streams on Reddit.
Interesting.
Playing around because I can't perform anywhere, and also using a huge array of effects all the time, going from synthesizers to wahs to harmonizers to crazy distortion guitar stuff all in the same stream on saxophone. There's a lot that's happening. We have some YouTube information. In fact, there's a YouTube video if you want to check it out. If anybody's familiar with the band Animals as Leaders, they are a progressive metal band. I did a cover of this progressive metal song of theirs using Barry and alto and pedals, and do a lot to sound like pretty heavy electric guitars and things like that. So we have stuff like that available out there as well.
So you know what we'll do? I'll get that video link from you and I'll put it in the show notes for people. You know what? I just thought of a great way to end this. Can you show us some of those crazy effects as a that would be
I'll
awesome.
just go through some cool stuff.
And as he's setting up, what we're going to be doing, we're absolutely having a part 2 because we're going to talk about that intra mic. And also I'd want to talk about part 2, people have electronic wind instruments, right? Various ones.
Oh, yeah.
And we could talk about that a little bit and how that may be different than, what you're doing right here.
Completely different. And that actually ties into the intra mic conversation perfectly.
Awesome.
Okay, so I can show you some of the crazier sounds that I utilize. So here's something that I like to use as a pad. A lot of what's cool with delay pedals and other types of modulation is that you can kind of remove yourself from the role of a saxophone player and put yourself in a rhythm section where you can play synth pads or rhythm section type of lines. So here's a pad I like to use underneath more ethereal type of sounds. So that's a lot of fun. But that can give you, a whole nother realm of sonic capabilities. Like then there's this one. I kind of forget what this one sounds like, but I know it's cool. So that's more of that synthesizer type of vibe where it gives you the opportunity to just kind of step out of your own comfort zone and your own, your own wheelhouse and do something completely different. Like I was talking about before, sometimes I get put in a position where I need to out guitar the guitar player.
Yeah.
So that can be done using this. So you get to, play on the Jimi Hendrix stuff if you want to.
That's so awesome. It's a great way to end this podcast with some saxophone shredding.
Rock.
Rock on. Thanks so much, Doug. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for the next time. Thanks, Donna.